right now, there is this massive shadow war happening across 5 different U.S. government departments.
Yeah. And they're all fighting over who basically controls the future of human knowledge.
Right. And the craziest part about all of this, none of them actually own the technology they are fighting over.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And for you, as a curious mind trying to make sense of this completely chaotic world of AI governance, I mean, trying to follow the headlines right now can feel like trying to map a maze while the walls are literally moving.
Oh, absolutely. It's impossible.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today on this deep dive is to figure out how a democratic government actually goes about controlling a technology that is just, too concentrated to self-correct.
Exactly. And moving way too fast for normal regulation.
And to do that, we are leaning heavily on this really brilliant piece from Tech Reader magazine.
Yeah, that's a great article. It was written by Aaron Rose on July 14th, 2026, and it's titled, Before AI, America Faced This Same Problem 5 Times. Here's what it did.
Such a good premise.
Right. Because you look around today, and this whole debate over who controls the most advanced artificial intelligence, it's entirely spilled out of closed boardrooms and into this chaotic public sphere.
Yeah, we're seeing these vastly different, highly partisan approaches, right? Like everyone is trying to tackle the exact same problem, but from completely different angles.
Exactly. Like you have Senator Bernie Sanders.
Right.
He put forward that proposal for the public to outright own half of the largest AI companies.
Which is a deeply structural approach, right? Like focusing heavily on wealth distribution.
Yeah. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have President Trump signing an executive order to create mandatory federal reviews for advanced models.
So that's more of a mechanism for, like, capability gatekeeping.
Precisely. And then operating in the background of all this noise, we have the U.S. government directly ordering Anthropic to suspend foreign access to its 2 most capable systems.
Right, which is just a blunt instrument of access control.
Exactly.
Now, I do want to pause and note explicitly to you listening right now, we are not endorsing any side of these political viewpoints.
Right. No, not at all.
Our goal in this deep dive is strictly observation. We're just looking at this policy landscape impartially, trying to understand the mechanics of how a government even tries to put its arms around something this massive.
Yeah, because looking at those 3 examples, the wealth distribution approach, the federal reviews, the access blocks, it is incredibly tempting to view them through the lens of traditional regulation.
Right, like aren't we just trying to figure out how to slap a standard set of regulations on a new industry?
That's what people think, yeah.
Like how we regulate telecom or, how the FAA regulates airlines. We see a problem, we draft the legislation and we build an agency, boom, done.
I mean, that is the architectural blueprint we're used to in peacetime.
Right.
But the core argument of Aaron Rose's article is that we aren't trying to leash a known animal here.
Okay.
We are attempting to invent a completely unprecedented legal structure for an entity that simply does not fit into any of our existing regulatory molds.
So if no template exists for what we're dealing with right now, how do you even begin to build an institution to govern it?
Well, the article suggests we actually have to look backward. We have to look at the first time America had to do exactly this.
Which means we're rewinding all the way back to 1913.
Right. The creation of the Federal Reserve.
Ah, the Fed.
Yeah, to understand why the Fed is like the perfect starting point for AI, we have to look at the mechanics of why it was created in the first place.
Right, because it wasn't just some calm academic decision.
Exactly. The Federal Reserve was not carefully designed in a vacuum by philosophers of economics. It was a pure improvisation.
Born out of panic, basically.
Absolute structural panic.
Yeah.
Specifically the Panic of 1907.
Right, because before the Fed existed, the United States basically left monetary policy entirely in the hands of the private market.
Yeah, and that mechanism of private control led directly to catastrophic bank runs.
It was so bad.
It was so fragile that a single wealthy individual, J.P. Morgan, essentially had to step in and act as a one-man central bank to bail out the entire U.S. economy.
Which is just wild to think about today.
It is. So the government realized that leaving the entire financial system to private bankers was way too dangerous.
But at the same time, full direct government management of the money supply was, politically impossible.
Unpalatable and impossible, yeah.
Yeah.
So in 1913, they formalized this hybrid structure.
Yeah, when you look under the hood of the Federal Reserve, it is an incredibly weird piece of machinery.
Very weird.
You have 12 regional Federal Reserve banks that operate mechanically as private corporations, right?
Exactly.
They are owned by member commercial banks, and they literally pay dividends to their shareholders.
Right, but then that private system is hard tethered to a public board of governors in Washington.
Right, whose members are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate.
So it's this bizarre creature that is accountable to both the public and private sectors.
But fully controlled by neither.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the direct structural parallel to what is happening with artificial intelligence right now.
Oh, this is good. Break this down.
Just as the Federal Reserve was created to control the supply of money and stabilize the financial system,
Right.
these few frontier AI labs now exercise control over the supply of cognitive capability.
Wow. So the AI labs are basically acting like central banks for brain power.
That's a great way to put it.
And right now, they're printing all the currency without a government treasury watching over them.
Exactly. They are making these unilateral decisions about what models even exist, right?
Yeah.
What those models are fundamentally capable of doing, who gets to access them, and at what price.
And the economic ripples of those private decisions touch absolutely every single sector of the global economy.
Just like manipulating interest rates does.
Right.
The Federal Reserve precedent proves this mechanical reality of American governance. When a private industry holds a lever that can move the entire economy, the government will eventually find a way to force a hybrid structure.
Because it's just too big to ignore.
Right. Systemic economy-wide influence simply cannot remain entirely within private governance. It can't just answer to corporate boards and, venture capital shareholders.
Okay, but what happens when the stakes escalate from just economic stability to literal physical survival?
Well, that forces us to look at the next puzzle piece.
Which takes us to 1942 and the Manhattan Project.
Right. So the U.S. government recognized this massive existential threat, and they knew they needed to build an atomic weapon.
Right.
But the underlying mechanics of how to actually do that were completely decentralized.
Because the government didn't just have a factory that made atomic bombs.
Exactly. The theoretical expertise was locked up in the minds of academics at universities.
Right.
And the actual manufacturing capacity, like the ability to refine the materials, that was sitting in private commercial corporations.
So how did they solve that? They just jammed them all together.
Pretty much. They intentionally blurred every conceivable line between the public and private sectors.
Okay.
The government funded and directed the overarching project, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
But they brought in private contractors to actually execute it.
Oh, like DuPont. Right.
Yes, DuPont, a commercial chemical company, built and operated the massive Hanford site in Washington state to produce plutonium.
And then you had the universities involved, too.
Right. The University of California operated the secret Los Alamos laboratory.
That is so crazy. The scientists designing the weapon weren't even government employees.
No.
Ah.
They held university appointments while working on a highly classified military base.
So that intentional blurring, did that just stop after the war ended?
No, it actually carried over into the aftermath. With the 1936 Atomic Energy Act, the government looked at the mechanism of nuclear proliferation and realized that enriched uranium was simply too dangerous to exist in the free market.
Right, obviously.
So the government stepped in and took outright legal ownership of all fissile material
Wow.
and the entire enrichment process. Private companies were eventually allowed to use nuclear power for civilian energy, sure.
But the government owned and controlled the underlying fuel cycle.
Exactly. And it actually took 3 decades before any partial privatization of that fuel cycle even began in the 1970s.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
Because there is a massive fundamental gap in this comparison.
What's that?
In 1945, the government actually owned the bomb.
Right.
They legally own the uranium. They own the physical infrastructure. Today, these frontier AI models are fiercely guarded private property.
Yeah, that's true.
The labs own the weights. They own the data centers. The government is only stepping in to assert control over who gets access on the margins, right? Like we saw with the Anthropic export controls.
Yeah.
So if the government doesn't actually own the underlying AI technology, unlike the nuclear fuel cycle, isn't this historical comparison totally broken?
On the surface of property rights, yes, you're right. But that actually misses the underlying mechanism that the text is trying to highlight.
Okay, what am I missing?
The real lesson of the nuclear era isn't about who holds the deed to the property or who holds the patent.
Right.
It's about the extreme durability of emergency structures.
Oh. Okay, walk me through the mechanism of that durability. Why does an emergency structure stick around for so long?
Think about the enriched uranium oversight that was established in 1946.
Okay.
That entire bureaucracy was built in a state of absolute existential panic.
Right, wartime necessity.
Exactly.
Huh.
It was justified by a temporary emergency. But institutions built under the adrenaline of a crisis have a really unique tendency to persist long, long after the crisis fades.
Oh, I see.
The half-life of that specific nuclear hybrid structure turned out to be over 30 years.
Wow.
And that is the crucial takeaway for AI today. The structures we are hastily throwing together right now.
Like these targeted export controls.
Right. And these opaque national security reviews. They are being built under the intense pressure of great power competition.
And everyone in Washington probably just assumes they're temporary bandages until a real law is passed.
Exactly. But the mechanism of history tells us that whatever awkward, improvised hybrid we build for AI today
Is going to stick around.
it's going to have a much, much longer half-life than anyone expects. We are going to be living with the consequences of these temporary rules for decades.
So if these emergency structures harden into permanent concrete, what does that actually look like decades down the road?
When the panic subsides.
Right, when the panic subsides and peacetime commercial interests take over again.
Well, that brings us to a wildly under-discussed piece of history.
Which is?
The Communications Satellite Act of 1962.
Okay, so this is after Sputnik, right?
Yes, after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the U.S. government realized that global satellite communications were going to be just way too strategically important to leave to a completely unregulated free market.
Right, but they also probably didn't want to just nationalize space communications and run the whole thing out of the Pentagon.
Exactly. So Congress literally invented a completely new legal category. They created ComSat.
Right, and ComSat was designed as a private, for-profit company, right?
It was. But
Yeah.
here's the catch: half of its board of directors was elected by regular public shareholders,
Okay.
and the other half was appointed directly by the President of the United States.
That is such a weird structure.
It was an entirely unique mechanical structure. It wasn't a federal agency, it wasn't a normal corporation, and it wasn't quite a public utility.
But it worked.
Functionally, yeah, it worked. For 38 years, ComSat successfully managed global satellite infrastructure.
Until, what, the industry matured?
Yeah, the industry matured, and it was finally absorbed by a private company in 2000.
Okay, so what's the warning here? That sounds like a success story.
The chilling lesson of the ComSat era is about the mechanism of regulatory capture.
Okay. Because regulatory capture is usually framed as something malicious, right? Like
Right.
cartoonish executives handing briefcases of cash to politicians.
Right, but the article frames it as something much more insidious and gradual.
Like it wasn't a sudden corruption scandal.
Exactly. The mechanism of regulatory capture here is just a gradual, decade-by-decade accommodation.
How does that happen?
Well, when you build a public-private hybrid, the experts who actually understand the incredibly complex technology, they all work for the private side.
Oh, right, because they have the budgets to hire the best engineers.
Yes. So the government regulators have to rely on the private company to even understand what it is they are regulating.
That makes total sense.
And over time, through shared lunches, revolving doors, and aligned incentives, the public institution slowly adopts the mindset of the private corporation.
Wow.
Eventually, the public interest that ComSat was originally designed to protect became completely indistinguishable from its own commercial drive for profit.
So the private partner in these hybrids ends up shaping the public institution much more effectively than the public institution regulates the private partner.
That is exactly it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are watching a modern version of that exact public-private entanglement play out right in front of us.
We really are.
And the source text points to Operation Warp Speed from 2020 as the closest structural mirror to what is happening with AI right now.
Operation Warp Speed provides the perfect mechanical lens for this moment.
Right, because during a global crisis, the government stepped in and completely altered the market dynamic.
Yeah, they threw billions of dollars at vaccine development and offered these guaranteed purchase commitments.
So the mechanism there was designed to completely remove the financial risk from the free market.
Exactly. The government provided the national security direction and the funding.
But the private pharmaceutical companies kept the intellectual property.
They kept the IP, they kept the operational control of their labs.
And crucially, they kept all of the commercial upside.
Right. The public got the vaccines to solve the crisis, which was great,
Sure.
but the private companies generated unprecedented wealth.
Now, apply that exact mechanism to artificial intelligence today.
Oh, it maps perfectly.
We are seeing massive government funding flowing into the ecosystem through compute grants and energy subsidies.
Yep. We have national security direction dictating the priorities of the labs.
We have federal export controls managing the global rollout of the technology.
But the private AI labs are keeping the intellectual property.
Right, the source code, the model weights.
And the massive commercial upside.
While the public is bearing all the downside risk of whatever economic or social disruptions this technology unleashes.
It's incredible.
It's like getting a massive government grant to build a revolutionary new engine.
Right.
Keeping the patent so you can get incredibly rich off it, and then slowly convincing the government inspectors that your company's profit margins are actually a matter of national security.
Which is brilliant for them.
Right, you end up with all the protection of the state, but all the unbounded profit of a Silicon Valley startup.
It is an incredible structural deal for the frontier labs.
Absolutely.
But as the text points out, we have all these historical puzzle pieces laid out on the table, right?
Right. The Federal Reserve's hybrid model.
The Manhattan Project's blurred public-private lines.
ComSat's slow slide into regulatory capture.
And Operation Warp Speed's model of public risk for private upside.
Right.
But there is one massive glaring factor that makes AI fundamentally different from regulating central banks, atomic bombs, satellites, and vaccines.
Which is the timeline, the sheer velocity of the technological development.
Exactly. The speed at which these models are evolving is completely unprecedented in the history of regulation.
It's dizzying.
Let's look at the mechanics of our previous examples.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve took 6 years of intense, deliberate debate after the Panic of 1907 to actually become law.
6 years.
ComSat required years of complex congressional hearings before the structure was finalized.
Right.
Even the Atomic Energy Act, with the full momentum of the end of World War II behind it, took a full year of focused legislative effort.
But the underlying capabilities of AI are moving so fast that our deliberative, democratic institutions physically cannot keep up with the pace of change.
They just can't.
By the time a congressional committee holds a hearing, drafts a bill, debates it, and passes it, the technology they are trying to regulate literally doesn't exist anymore.
It's already moved on. An AI model that triggers a rigorous national security review today will be 2 or 3 generations obsolete by the time the government agency designed to regulate it is fully staffed and operational.
And that velocity is creating an absolute chaotic executive turf war, isn't it?
Oh, a total turf war. Because Congress is structurally too slow to act, the executive branch is attempting to fill the regulatory void.
Right.
But it is vital to understand that the government is not acting as one unified, monolithic body here.
It is a civil war inside Washington.
Exactly.
You have the Pentagon looking at AI as a weapons system.
Yep.
You have the intelligence community looking at it as an espionage tool.
Right.
The Commerce Department sees it as a critical economic export.
And the Treasury is terrified about algorithmic market crashes.
Every single one of these massive bureaucracies has distinct, often conflicting preferences for how the technology should be governed.
They're all pulling at the exact same steering wheel, trying to direct the future of the technology.
The text notes this incredible detail about the major export controls placed on AI models in 2026.
Oh, this is fascinating.
The actual enforcement of those rules came out of the Commerce Department.
Right.
But the underlying national security logic that justified those specific controls, that originated somewhere else entirely.
Heavily influenced by the intelligence community and the Pentagon.
Right. So you have the Commerce Department enforcing economic rules that were actually designed by spies and generals.
That's so messy.
If the technology is evolving faster than a bill can legally become a law, and 5 different government departments are fighting a shadow war over the steering wheel, aren't we basically guaranteed to drive this thing off a cliff?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism of history actually offers a strange kind of reassurance here.
Reassurance how?
Well, the final governance structure that emerges for artificial intelligence is not going to be a beautiful, elegant, comprehensive law passed harmoniously by a united Congress.
Oh, definitely not.
It is going to be improvised.
Yep.
It will be ugly. It will be incomplete.
Right.
But it will survive.
Because the mechanism of panic will force it to survive.
Exactly. Just as the structural failure of the Panic of 1907 forced the creation of the Fed, because the alternative was total collapse, there will inevitably be an AI equivalent.
An AI panic of 1907.
Yes. Some accumulation of incidents. Whether it's a massive automated cyber attack, an algorithmic flash crash, or some catastrophic deepfake event.
Something that makes the current system of letting a few tech CEOs govern themselves completely untenable.
Right. And when that crisis hits, the government won't have time to draft a perfect blueprint.
No.
Whatever messy, improvised, interagency hybrid structure is currently standing at that exact moment, that's what will be locked into place.
And as we learned from the nuclear era, that structure will be incredibly durable.
It will last for decades.
So for you listening to this, thinking about your own life, your career, your business, why should you care about this bureaucratic turf war happening deep inside Washington?
That's a great question.
Because whoever ultimately wins this fight, whether it's defense, commerce, or some new hybrid agency we haven't even named yet, they will dictate the fundamental rules of the future.
Absolutely.
They will dictate what AI tools you are legally allowed to use. They will dictate how much those tools cost by controlling the regulatory burden on the labs. They will be the ones gatekeeping your personal access to the next generation of human knowledge. The winner of this messy turf war gets to design the operating system for the next century of the global economy.
So we have mapped out how a government attempts to control a technology that defies all traditional blueprints.
So what does this all mean?
Good question.
When we look back at the historical precedents, a very clear narrative emerges. We aren't looking at a clean architectural blueprint for the future. We are looking at a messy, repeated history of panic and improvisation.
Exactly.
The Federal Reserve showed us that when private companies control a foundational resource like cognitive capability, a public-private hybrid is structurally inevitable.
Right.
The Manhattan Project taught us that whatever emergency governance structures we build under CANIC have incredibly long half-lives, lasting for decades.
Which is terrifying, but true.
ComSat warned us about the subtle, slow-moving mechanism of regulatory capture, where the private sector eventually swallows the public interest whole.
Slowly but surely.
Operation Warp Speed provided the current modern template, where the government absorbs the risk and the private sector hoards the profit.
Yeah.
And finally, the sheer velocity of AI is forcing a chaotic turf war across the government, guaranteeing that our final regulatory framework will be an ugly, durable improvisation.
It is a profound historical mapping of how institutions are actually built under pressure.
It really is.
But there is one final provocative thought that stems from all this. Something that takes the mechanism of regulatory capture we discussed and pushes it a step further than the text even did.
Okay, lay it on us.
We have spent this entire deep dive operating on one fundamental assumption.
Which is?
We have been looking at how the government will govern AI. We are assuming the government remains the architect and AI remains the building material.
Right. That's the baseline assumption.
But if these frontier systems continue to scale in capability, they will eventually be deployed by the government itself to handle the sheer complexity of modern governance.
Oh, wow.
They will be used to help draft intricate legislation. They will be used to analyze massive streams of real-time economic data for the Treasury.
Sure.
They will run hyper-complex geopolitical war games for the Pentagon.
That makes sense. I mean, the government will use the best tools available to do its job.
But if the government increasingly relies on the AI to understand the world, and the AI's underlying logic engine begins shaping the very policy decisions the government makes,
Wait.
at what point does the governance structure flip?
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
If regulatory capture is just the private sector slowly bending the government's rules over decades, what happens when the logic engine itself is doing the bending?
That is wild.
At what point do we realize that we aren't just governing AI, but the AI has effectively begun governing the government?
That completely reframes the entire concept of regulatory capture.
Doesn't it?
We usually worry about human executives whispering in the ear of a regulator. But if the regulator is asking an AI model to write the regulations, the capture is built right into the code. We started this deep dive talking about blueprints, how we usually build our institutions with clean architectural precision.
Right.
But looking at the sheer velocity of AI, we realize there is no blueprint. We are wading into the muddy waters of a completely unprecedented technological era, trying to build a bridge out of historical spare parts while we are already driving over it at 100 miles an hour.
And the mechanism of history tells us that whatever messy, improvised bridge we throw together next is the one we will be driving on for the rest of our lives.
A massive thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and always question the invisible structures being built around you today.